Hi, and welcome back. We're going to do something a little bit differently with this episode. I'm going to show you a photo that I took recently, and it has some obvious issues. But what I want you to do is look at that image and see if you think you can figure out what is causing the error in the image. So first off, let's look at the image. Now I'm going to give you a little bit more added context. That image was shot with a new to me Fujinon 105mm SW f8 lens. I got that lens because often when I was shooting I was finding that the 90mm I had was sometimes a little too wide and my go-to 135mm lens was sometimes a little bit too tight. So I thought 105 would be the sweet spot. Now originally I got the non-SW 105mm Fujinon, which is an f5.6 lens. However, unfortunately, the image circle of that is just a little bit too small for 167. So I purchased the f8 version, the SW, which has a significantly bigger image circle, but obviously it's a little bit slower. Now the only downside of that is that most of those lenses are quite expensive. So I got onto the Japanese auction sites and I found a lens listed that was quite reasonable in terms of price, but it was listed as junk. Now, if you've purchased from the Japanese auction sites at any stage before, you'll know that they pretty much only have two ways of describing things, either pristine or perfect, or junk. I have bought so many cameras and lenses and so on from Japan auction sites listed as junk that have been perfect. They've just had some dings or scratches, but have functionally been perfect. So I took a punt, ordered the lens, and it arrived. Took the image, and it was as you see. So I want you to put in the comments what you think caused the issue, considering that I was using that lens and that image only happened with that lens. So for me, the first thing I decided to do was to test it with a little homemade shutter speed tester. It's a little Arduino based system that I built based on some plans off of YouTube. Running the lens through the tests, at the lower shutter speeds, it was spot on. So perfect. It was a little slow on the higher shutter speeds. Anything over 1/125th was a little bit slow, upwards to 1/500th, which is the fastest the lens will do. That being said, I don't think I've ever shot with large format cameras like this at anything over 1/125th. And generally, most of my exposures are down in the 1/130th, 1/15th, and so on. So that wasn't a problem. So as far as I could tell, the shutter was actuating fine, all the blades looked fine. So with no smoking gun, I kind of set the lens aside because I had other projects that were keeping me busy and it wasn't really high on my priorities. However, next time I went out to do a shoot, once I'd finished the composition that I'd planned to shoot, I decided to throw the lens on and give it another go. Approaching the theory of try something different and see if I get a different result, I decided to shoot at f16 instead of the f22 that I had shot at previously. And what do you know? Image was perfect. Came back, there was absolutely no issues that I could see. Which is very confusing because the aperture blades themselves are pristine and perfect. There's no problems with the movement, so it couldn't possibly be the aperture. But then again, I'd shot at f22, had an issue, shot at f16, didn't have an issue. So the only thing to do would be to shoot some more test images. So first off, I shot another test image at f22 to see if I had the problem still. f22, I had the problem. So another image shot at f16 to see if I have the problem. However, I shot at f16 the working aperture, and what do you know, the problem was back again. So I have one image where at f16 there was no problem. I have images at f22 and f16 where there's problems. What is going on? That left me with only real one option. I needed to disassemble the lens and try and give it a clean. So I got my lens spanner out and removed the top locking ring to get access to the elements. I placed a little suction cap on the lens to both protect it and also help with removing the lens when I removed the locking ring. Now, interestingly enough, the locking ring had some little scratches on it, so it looks like it had been disassembled at least once before, and removing the locking ring was exceptionally hard. I actually ended up having to use some slight amount of deoxit to sort of get the ring moving to be able to even remove it. So perhaps the lens had been dropped, or perhaps it had been there had been moisture that had caused it to sort of not rust, but at least lock in place. However, I was eventually able to remove the locking ring and remove all of the three elements in the front part of the lens. Looking at the base two elements, they were pristine, perfectly clear, absolutely no problems whatsoever. The main element, however, The paint around the edges had definitely rubbed off, or had started to flake off. And I did notice that there was a little bit of haziness around the edges of the lens, not the central area that was the main part of the lens. It almost seemed like the haze was around the edges, which were actually blocked out by the paint. That being said, I decided to see if I could give the lens a clean, because at this stage, my theory being that it was probably due to haze, I had nothing to lose. So to clean the lens, I first submerged it in some hydrogen peroxide, which apparently will kill any fungus. Once I dried that off, I then gave it a thorough cleaning with a lens wipe, and then it appeared to be perfectly clean, and so I repainted the black paint that was supposed to go around the edges of the lens, and put the lens back together again to see if that solves the problem. And so I went off and took another exposure. And as you can see, the problem's still there. It was at this point that I was at my wit's end. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason to it. I'd had an image that had exposed perfectly, so I knew that it was technically possible for the lens to work. And yet, at every aperture, the problem was happening. I couldn't clean the lens anymore, so I really didn't know what to do. So I pretty much just set the lens aside on my desk and forgot about it. Fast forward a week, and I'm working on putting together do the final checks and quality controls of some of the EV617s I was shipping out to clients. And one of the steps of the quality control is I like to check to make sure that the bellows and all of the attachments and so on are light tight. There's no light leaks. Now, to make sure that the front standard bellows attachment is light tight, what I like to do is, and you'll see here I've got a lens board here, is I actually I've got a blocked off lens board, which I mount onto the front standard, like so. And then that means that theoretically, if any light were to come in from the front, I would know I had a lens leak. So normally I use this plate. Now, because I've been testing a couple of cameras, this plate was sitting on another camera, and so I didn't have access to it. But I happened to have my cursed lens sitting on my desk, and so I threw this lens onto the camera and just decided to do my normal light leak test. So get the torch around the front, and a curious thing, directly below the lens there was a very, very, very precise small pinpoint of light. Some would almost call it a pinhole of light. This is very confusing because the lens board shouldn't have any light coming through it. The only light that should come through should be through the lens. It was then that I noticed something. All lens boards have a little registration mark there, which marries up with a little registration pin there, which just helps with aligning the lens board. Now, when I designed the EV617, I just duplicated the lens retention plate at the bottom from my previous camera, which had a lens retention plate made out of aluminium. So I designed it that way, and every lens I've used that I've got a 135, a 90mm, and a 210. All the lens board sits in that perfectly, zero problems. However, it turns out the little notch here of this particular lens, or this particular lens board, is minutely bigger than all of the other lens boards I had. What was happening was, when this lens was mounted on this retention plate, it was letting through a pinprick of light. So effectively what I was doing is every time I was exposing an image, I was actually getting a pinhole camera exposure coming from that little tiny, slightly unfocused amount of light coming from that pinhole, as well as the lens exposure. And that was giving me that double exposure effect. It wasn't a perfectly focused pinhole because there's some mathematics around what your f-stop is depending on the size of your pinhole if you're using a pinhole camera. But it was letting a precise amount of light through nonetheless. So into CAD, I adjusted the plate so it's got a little raised section specifically for this lens to make sure that it never happens again. And I decided to take the camera out for one last test to see, have I solved the problem? And as you can see, problem solved. So the question is, how many people guessed this? Now, hopefully, you put your guess at the beginning and you haven't changed it. If you did guess this, I'm very impressed. If you didn't guess this, no shame on you, because it took me weeks and weeks and weeks. So, I have a perfectly working 105mm lens. You know what that means? It means it's time to test it out. So, to test out my 105mm lens, I found a composition. I was driving past one night of a parking garage at a shopping centre. I haven't actually shot such low light scenarios before, with large format anyway, so this should be interesting. Just because it is so dark, I'm going to shoot it with CineStill 800. It's the only 800 film I had in my fridge. I'm not super into shooting CineStill. I don't know if the halation will detract from the image. There's a few lights, and I know everybody likes the whole halation glow, but I'm not a big fan. I was originally planning to shoot it on Nectar, but when I did a sort of a quick spot reading, the exposure times were going to be in the minutes, and I just didn't want to deal with that, so I figured might as well shoot with the CineStill. So loading that up into my film back. I do suppose one benefit of shooting in the middle of the night is there's not people looking around asking you what you're doing with such a giant camera, which tends to happen with these cameras. So shooting in the middle of the night, when no one's around, gets significantly less hassle. And the only real negative I can see here, well, there's a few negatives, is that this 105 lens is an f8 lens, so it's going to be, focus is going to be a little tricky. So at f8, let's see if we can actually see anything. Just as I thought, can't see much. What that is middle grey. 15 seconds. We're good. So we've got a measured exposure of 15 seconds with reciprocity 35 seconds. Let's go for an exposure. Alright. On the dark side, 35 seconds, and one minute. And here's the image. Once again, I'm not 100% sure that CineStill was the right choice for this. The halation you're getting from the lights is quite extreme and noticeable, and there's a part of me that thinks that it's detracting from the image. That being said, I was incredibly happy with the exposure. I think I nailed that, and focus is great. I managed to get everything that I wanted in focus to be in focus, and as a happy little accident / I didn't really think about it, the traffic in the distance has given me a nice, perfect long exposure trail, which really sort of is a nice little addition to the image. So then it was time to move on to my second setup, which was really more of an added bonus. It was at this point where I was completely and utterly focused on getting the image when a police vehicle decided to pull up behind me. Nope, hello.
What are you doing?
Taking photos. The film camera.
No, we're not questioning you.
No, all good.
I'm just curious. Sorry
It's a no, that's all right. It's an old format film camera. So
nice. And what do you do with the pictures and stuff? Just
Instagram. Yeah, just waste a lot of money. This camera shoots literally 4 frames for a roll. So roughly $10 a shot.
Good on you, mate.
Yeah, something to do with the time.
Be safe, though.
I'll try. Thanks.
Enjoy.
Thanks. Cheers. 35 seconds. Minute 5. And there we go. Whilst technically it's fine, it's exposed correctly, focus is good, I just really don't like the framing. To be fair, this was not my original composition. This was just an added bonus that I thought I'd pick up whilst I was there. And it was fun to shoot. However, it just really doesn't have what I wanted. The original image, the original composition is really what I'd planned for, and I'm happy that that one came out as well as it did. And so there you have it. We go from having a lens that was listed as junk to a fully functional, fully working lens that is producing an image that I'm incredibly happy with. And it's now added an extra lens into my list of lenses that I can use to get the right composition. I really think the takeaway from this is don't always assume that if something is listed as junk or non-working, that that's actually its current state. And in many respects, it's the fun of finding the error or finding the fault is part of the journey. So until the next time, say hi to your dog for me.